November 2, 1942. Imperial Japanese Navy Headquarters, Truk Lagoon. Commander Tameichi Hara reviewed the latest intelligence report on American patrol torpedo boats with barely concealed disdain. The document, compiled from observations during the recent Guadalcanal campaign, describes small wooden vessels the Americans called PT boats, patrol torpedo boats, operating in the Solomon Islands. American PT boats are 77 feet in length, constructed of plywood, powered by gasoline engines. The assessment read, maximum speed approximately 40 knots, armed with torpedoes and light machine guns. These vessels represent American desperation, attempting to substitute quantity of small craft for quality of proper warships. The wooden construction and light armament render them unsuitable for serious naval combat. Assessment: minimal threat. These are pleasure boats playing at war, not combat vessels. Hara circled the phrase, pleasure boats playing at war, and filed the report with approval. He had commanded destroyers in combat from Pearl Harbor to the Java Sea. He understood naval warfare. Real warships were steel vessels displacing thousands of tons, armed with heavy guns and torpedoes, crewed by trained sailors who understood discipline and duty. These American PT boats were toys, fast toys perhaps, but toys nonetheless. What Commander Hara didn't know, what the entire Imperial Japanese Navy couldn't comprehend, was that within 6 weeks, a squadron of these toys would intercept the cruiser Teruzuki during the Battle of Tassafaronga, and, in a coordinated attack lasting barely 90 seconds, put 3 torpedoes into the warship, sending it to the bottom with over 300 sailors. And over the following 3 years, these plywood boats would sink or damage 2 cruisers, 3 destroyers, dozens of cargo ships, hundreds of barges, and become such a menace that Japanese naval forces would alter their operational patterns to avoid areas where PT boats operated. This is the story of how American innovation defeated Japanese naval tradition, how small wooden boats became strategic weapons, and how the Imperial Navy's contempt transformed into fear of vessels they had dismissed as toys. The PT boat concept emerged from American naval experimentation in the late 1930s. As European nations rearmed, the U.S. Navy explored coastal defense options that didn't require expensive destroyers or cruisers. Motor torpedo boats, small, fast vessels carrying torpedoes, offered an attractive solution, cheap to build, quick to produce, effective in coastal waters and restricted channels. In 1939, the Navy held trials comparing designs from multiple manufacturers. Elco Naval Division and Higgins Industries submitted the most promising designs. Both companies had experience building civilian pleasure craft, mahogany speedboats for wealthy customers. Their military designs adapted luxury boat construction to combat requirements. The Elco 77-foot PT boat that emerged as the primary production model was revolutionary in conception, but deceptively simple in execution. The hull was constructed of 2 layers of mahogany planking over white oak frames, the same construction used for expensive yachts. 3 Packard V-12 gasoline engines, each producing 1,500 horsepower, drove the 56-ton vessel to speeds exceeding 40 knots. For 21-inch torpedoes in tubes provided offensive armament. Machine guns, initially .50 caliber, later 20 mm and 40 mm cannon, provided defensive firepower and anti-aircraft capability. The design philosophy was fundamentally different from traditional naval vessels. Where destroyers and cruisers relied on armor, PT boats relied on speed. Where capital ships fought in daylight with guns at long range, PT boats attacked at night with torpedoes at close range. Where conventional warships required years to build and train, PT boats could be completed in months and crews trained in weeks. Japanese naval doctrine, rooted in Mahanian theory emphasizing decisive battle between capital ships, had no framework for understanding PT boat tactics. The Imperial Navy had its own motor torpedo boats, the T-1 class boats based on British Thornycroft designs, but these were considered auxiliary craft, unsuitable for serious combat. The idea that small boats could threaten cruisers and destroyers seemed absurd. This cultural blind spot was reinforced by early encounters. The first PT boat combat occurred on December 8, 1941, when Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron 3, stationed in the Philippines, attempted to defend against the Japanese invasion. The attacks were largely unsuccessful. PT-34 was destroyed by Japanese aircraft. Several boats experienced mechanical failures. Torpedo attacks against Japanese transports mostly missed. The Mark 8 torpedoes were unreliable, and crews were inexperienced. Japanese after-action reports noted. American motor torpedo boats attempted attacks, but were ineffective. Several torpedoes observed, but did not detonate. Boats withdrew after brief engagement. Assessment confirmed. These vessels lack combat capability against trained forces. The assessment was premature. The PT boats in the Philippines were operating under impossible conditions, overwhelmed by Japanese air power, without proper maintenance facilities, using defective torpedoes. The failures reflected circumstances, not inherent capability. But Japanese naval intelligence interpreted the Philippines campaign as confirming that PT boats were ineffective. The squadron that would change Japanese perceptions was Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron 2, which arrived in the Solomon Islands in October 1942 to support the Guadalcanal campaign. The squadron commander, Lieutenant Commander Alan Montgomery, understood that PT boat success required new tactics adapted to the boat's unique capabilities. Montgomery's doctrine emphasized night operations, coordinated attacks by multiple boats, use of high speed to approach targets quickly and escape before defenders could respond, and targeting logistics and reinforcements rather than engaging warships directly when avoidable. The PT boats would operate from advanced bases, small facilities hidden in coves and inlets, striking at night and disappearing before dawn. The geography of the Solomon Islands was perfect for PT boat operations. Narrow channels between islands created choke points where Japanese ships had to pass. Thick jungle provided concealment for advanced bases. The Japanese Navy's Tokyo Express runs, fast destroyer and cruiser forces bringing reinforcements to Guadalcanal under cover of darkness, created predictable targets for ambush. On the night of October 1, 1942, PT boats intercepted 3 Japanese destroyers running supplies to Guadalcanal. The engagement was brief and chaotic. PT-60, commanded by Lieutenant Robert Searles, closed to 1,000 yards and fired 2 torpedoes. Both missed. The destroyers opened fire with every gun, turning the night into streams of tracers. The PT boat scattered, using smoke and speed to escape. No hits were achieved on either side, but the Japanese ships broke off their supply run and withdrew. The mere presence of PT boats had accomplished the mission of preventing reinforcement. Over the following weeks, PT boats refined their tactics through trial and error. They learned that approaching from multiple directions simultaneously divided enemy fire and increased hit probability. They discovered that Japanese destroyers' main guns couldn't depress enough to hit small, fast targets at close range. If PT boats got inside 1,000 yards, they were relatively safe from the enemy's heaviest weapons. They found that firing torpedoes from closer than 500 yards increased hit probability dramatically. But they also learned painful lessons. PT-44 was sunk by Japanese destroyer fire on November 1st. PT-37 was destroyed by aircraft on November 11th. The plywood construction that made PT boats fast and maneuverable also made them vulnerable. A single hit from a destroyer's 5-inch gun could obliterate a PT boat. The crews learned to respect their fragility while exploiting their speed. The engagement that would demolish Japanese contempt for PT boats occurred on the night of November 30th to December 1st, 1942, during the Battle of Tassafaronga. 8 Japanese destroyers under Rear Admiral Reizo Tanaka were running supplies to Guadalcanal when they encountered 5 American cruisers and 6 destroyers. The resulting battle saw Japanese destroyers torpedo for American cruisers, sinking one and heavily damaging the others, while losing 1 destroyer. The cruiser Teruzuki, damaged by American gunfire, had been detached from the main Japanese force and was attempting to withdraw when it encountered PT boats from Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron 2. 8 PT boats, PT-59, PT-44, PT-37, PT, PT-109, PT-45, PT-46, PT-48, and PT-40 were operating in the area, having been alerted that a major surface action was underway. At 0127 hours, PT-59, commanded by Lieutenant John Searles, detected a large vessel making approximately 18 knots, reduced speed indicating damage. The silhouette was identified as a Japanese light cruiser. Searles radioed the other boats, coordinating a simultaneous attack from multiple directions. The engagement that followed was executed with precision that belied the PT boat's toy reputation. 4 boats approached from the cruiser's port quarter, 3 from starboard, 1 from ahead. The Teruzuki's crew, exhausted from hours of combat and attempting to save their damaged ship, didn't detect the small wooden boats until they were already inside 1,000 yards. At 0129 hours, when the PT boats were within 500 to 800 yards, all 8 boats fired their torpedoes nearly simultaneously. 32 torpedoes launched in less than 30 seconds. The night erupted with the white wakes of torpedoes crossing the water from multiple directions. Teruzuki's crew spotted the wakes and attempted emergency maneuvers, but with reduced speed and damaged steering, the cruiser couldn't evade. The first torpedo struck Teruzuki amidships at 0130 hours, 15 seconds after the first PT boat fired. The second hit 5 seconds later near the forward magazine. The third struck aft near the engineering spaces. 3 hits in 90 seconds, more hits than American cruisers had achieved during hours of surface combat earlier that night. The damage was catastrophic. The forward magazine detonated, breaking the cruiser's back. The engineering spaces flooded, killing power and leaving the ship dead in the water. Teruzuki began sinking immediately, capsizing and going down by the bow within 4 minutes of the first torpedo impact. The PT boats didn't wait to observe results. Following doctrine, they scattered at high speed immediately after firing, making 40-plus knots through the darkness, laying smoke to cover their withdrawal. Japanese destroyers arrived minutes later, but found only wreckage and survivors. The attackers had vanished into the night. Of Teruzuki's crew of 330, only 23 survived, rescued by Japanese destroyers. The rest went down with the ship or died in the water afterward. For the Imperial Japanese Navy, the loss was shocking not just because a cruiser had been sunk, but because it had been sunk by vessels they had dismissed as insignificant. The Japanese after-action report, filed by surviving officers and compiled at Rabaul, revealed the profound shock the engagement had caused. Teruzuki was destroyed by coordinated attack from American motor torpedo boats. Multiple torpedoes struck from different directions, indicating skilled tactical employment. Previous assessments suggesting these vessels are ineffective must be revised. American PT boats operating in restricted waters at night represent serious threat to all vessels. Recommend increased vigilance and defensive measures when operating in areas where these craft are known to be present. The recommendation represented complete reversal of previous doctrine. Japanese naval forces were now being advised to fear and avoid areas where PT boats operated, an admission that these toys had become strategic threats. Commander Tameichi Hara, whose earlier assessment had dismissed PT boats as pleasure boats playing at war, was assigned to investigate PT boat tactics after the Teruzuki sinking. His revised report, filed in January 1943, acknowledged the catastrophic intelligence failure. American PT boats employ tactics specifically designed to defeat superior surface forces. They attack at night from multiple directions, saturating target areas with torpedoes before defenders can respond effectively. Their wooden construction makes radar detection difficult. Their high speed makes interception nearly impossible. Their small size makes them difficult targets for main battery guns. Most critically, their crews demonstrate skill and aggression that contradict earlier assessments of American naval capabilities. These vessels are not toys. They are effective weapons optimally designed for their operational environment. The tactical response to PT boats consumed disproportionate Japanese naval resources. Destroyers were assigned specifically to hunt PT boats, diverting them from fleet operations. Small patrol craft were deployed to screen areas where PT boats might be lurking. Japanese naval forces began routing around areas of known PT boat activity, adding hours or days to transit times. Cruisers and destroyers were ordered to maintain higher speeds in restricted waters, consuming fuel inefficiently to reduce vulnerability to torpedo attack. The psychological impact was equally significant. Japanese sailors, who had dominated Pacific naval combat for the war's first year, now had to worry about wooden boats appearing out of the darkness to launch torpedo attacks. The uncertainty was corrosive. PT boats could be anywhere in the thousands of small islands and channels, invisible until they attacked, gone before pursuit could be organized. Lieutenant Commander John Searles, who had commanded PT boats in the Philippines and would later command squadrons in the Mediterranean, described the PT boat advantage. "We're not trying to fight fair. We're trying to win. A PT boat can't fight a destroyer gun-to-gun. We'd be blown out of the water. But at night, at close range, with good tactics, we can put torpedoes into anything that floats." The Japanese are trained for daytime gun duels between capital ships. "We're fighting a different war, attacking at night, hitting hard, and disappearing. They don't know how to counter it because it doesn't fit their doctrine." The PT boat offensive capabilities were complemented by their role in rescuing downed airmen, conducting reconnaissance, and harassing Japanese coastal positions. The boat's shallow draft, only 5 feet fully loaded, allowed them to operate in waters where destroyers couldn't go. They could beach themselves to offload troops or supplies, then pull off and escape before enemy forces could respond. The most famous rescue operation occurred in August 1943, when PT-109, commanded by Lieutenant John F. Kennedy, was rammed and sunk by the Japanese destroyer Amajurai. Kennedy and his crew swam to a small island, and other PT boats conducted rescue operations under fire. The incident demonstrated both the risks PT boat crews faced and their determination to recover lost comrades. Kennedy would later become President of the United States, and the PT-109 story would become part of American naval legend. But beyond the famous incidents, PT boats conducted hundreds of operations that cumulatively inflicted significant damage on Japanese logistics. Barges carrying supplies to isolated garrisons were PT boat prey. The boats could approach fast, destroy barges with gunfire, and escape before defenders could organize. Japanese forces occupying bypassed islands slowly starved as PT boats interdicted their supply lines. The anti-barge campaign was particularly effective in the Solomon Islands and New Guinea. Japanese forces, unable to risk large ships in waters dominated by Allied air power and PT boats, relied on barges for resupply. PT boats hunted these barges relentlessly, using their speed to intercept, their guns to destroy, and their shallow draft to pursue barges into rivers and inlets where destroyers couldn't follow. By mid-1943, Japanese garrisons in forward areas were receiving only a fraction of the supplies they needed. Starvation and disease killed more Japanese soldiers than combat in many sectors. The PT boats' contribution to this strategic isolation was disproportionate to their size and numbers. Fewer than 100 points boats operating in the Solomons created logistics problems that affected tens of thousands of Japanese troops. The armament evolution reflected increasing respect for PT boat capability. Early PT boats carried 4.50 caliber machine guns. By 1943, they were mounting 20mm Oerlikon cannons. By 1944, many carried 40mm Bofors guns and even 37mm automatic cannon. Some boats removed torpedo tubes entirely, converting to pure gunboats optimized for anti-barge operations. The flexibility to modify armament based on mission requirements demonstrated the design's adaptability. German naval observers, reviewing PT boat operations through intelligence sharing agreements, filed assessments that influenced Kriegsmarine doctrine. A 1943 report noted, "American PT boats represent effective adaptation of coastal motorboat concept to offensive operations. The combination of high-speed, coordinated tactics and night operations creates capability disproportionate to vessel size." German E-boats employ similar principles, but emphasize individual action rather than coordinated squadron tactics. American methods appear more effective for area denial and logistics interdiction. The production scale was typically American. Once PT boats proved effective, production ramped up dramatically. Elko would ultimately build 399 points boats. Higgins built 205. Smaller numbers came from other manufacturers. Peak monthly production reached 30 boats. The boats were shipped disassembled, transported by cargo ship, and reassembled at forward bases. The distributed production and simple construction meant that losing boats to combat or accidents didn't significantly impact operational capability. Replacements arrived continuously. The crew quality was exceptional. PT boat duty attracted volunteers. The service was hazardous, glamorous, and offered rapid advancement for successful officers. Many PT boat commanders were in their early 20s, commanding boats and crews in combat situations that would have been considered beyond their experience in conventional naval service. The small crew sizes, typically 12 to 14 men, and close quarters created tight-knit units with high morale and esprit de corps. The hazards were real and constant. Beyond enemy action, the PT boat's gasoline engines created fire risks. A single tracer round hitting fuel tanks could create an inferno. High-speed operation in darkness risked collision with reefs, logs, or other boats. Mechanical failures far from base could leave boats dead in the water in enemy-controlled seas. Of 531 points boats built during the war, 69 were lost to enemy action, and dozens more to operational causes. But the loss rate of 13% over the entire war was remarkably low compared to other offensive forces. Submarines, similarly operating offensively in enemy-controlled waters, lost 22% of boats. The PT boat's combination of speed, small size, and night operations provided survivability that larger, slower vessels lacked. The peak of PT boat operations came during the Philippines campaign in 1944 to 1945. Dozens of PT boats operated from advanced bases, interdicting Japanese logistics, attacking damaged warships, conducting rescues, and supporting army operations. The density of PT boat coverage made night movement dangerous for any Japanese vessel. Japanese naval forces, already reeling from carrier battle losses and submarine attrition, found their coastal waters contested by small wooden boats that appeared suddenly, attacked violently, and vanished before response was possible. The Battle of Surigao Strait on October 25, 1944, saw PT boats integrated into the defensive plan. 39 PT boats deployed in patrol lines to detect and attack Japanese forces attempting to transit the strait. While the PT boats' torpedo attacks achieved few hits, the Japanese warships were moving at high speed and maneuvering violently. The PT boats' contact reports allowed American battleships and cruisers to perfectly position for ambush. The resulting battle annihilated the Japanese force. The PT boats' reconnaissance contribution was as valuable as direct combat results. As the war progressed, Japanese respect for PT boats evolved from grudging acknowledgement to active fear. Captured Japanese documents from late 1940 foreshow operational planning, specifically accounting for PT boat threat. Transport missions were scheduled to avoid known PT boat operating areas. Destroyer escorts were assigned specifically for PT boat defense. Japanese forces sometimes canceled or delayed operations if PT boat presence was detected. This operational impact, causing the enemy to alter plans and divert resources, was strategic effect beyond the PT boat's actual combat power. The Japanese Navy was spending destroyer time and fuel hunting wooden boats instead of screening carriers or escorting transports. The resource diversion multiplied across hundreds of operations, degraded Japanese naval effectiveness significantly. The PT boat crews themselves were under no illusions about their vessel's limitations. They understood they were operating fragile craft against forces that could destroy them with single hits. The wooden construction, while providing speed and flexibility, offered no protection. The gasoline engines, while powerful, were fire hazards. The torpedoes were temperamental weapons that didn't always run true or detonate on impact. Lieutenant John Searles who commanded PT-59 during the Teruzuki engagement, described the psychology. You're in a plywood boat with 3,000 gallons of high-octane gasoline, carrying warheads filled with explosives, charging towards steel warships that outweigh you 100 to 1 and can blow you out of the water with one hit. The only thing keeping you alive is speed, darkness, and surprise. You attack fast, hit hard, and get the hell out before they can organize a response. It's not about being brave, it's about being smart and fast and lucky. The post-war analysis of PT boat operations concluded that while individual engagements rarely achieved decisive results, the cumulative impact was strategically significant. PT boats sank or damaged approximately 150 Japanese vessels of various types, including the cruiser Teruzuki, several destroyers, and numerous transports and barges. More importantly, they forced Japanese naval forces to expend disproportionate resources on defense against a relatively small threat, constrained Japanese operational planning, and degraded Japanese logistics to isolated garrisons. The cost-effectiveness was extraordinary. A PT boat cost approximately $250,000 to build, roughly 1/40th the cost of a destroyer. Crew training took weeks instead of months. Yet PT boats achieved combat results that sometimes exceeded those of vastly more expensive warships. The Teruzuki engagement exemplified this. 8 PT boats costing $2 million total had sunk a cruiser that cost $10+ million to build and years to complete. General Douglas MacArthur, whose island-hopping strategy in the Southwest Pacific relied heavily on PT boat support, stated in 1944, "The PT boat is one of the most valuable weapons we possess. Its speed and offensive power make it ideal for the type of warfare we're conducting. The Japanese respect PT boats, they fear them, actually, and that fear disrupts their operations. Any weapon that makes the enemy afraid to move freely in their own coastal waters is worth many times its cost." The Japanese Navy never developed effective countermeasures to PT boat operations. Proposals for specialized PT boat hunters were discussed, but never implemented. Resources were needed for fleet operations against American carriers and submarines. Radar improved detection, but PT boats' small size and wooden construction made them difficult radar targets. Increased destroyer escorts helped, but destroyers couldn't be everywhere, and PT boats could simply wait for opportunities when escorts were absent. By 1945, Japanese naval operations in the Philippines and surrounding waters had become nearly impossible. PT boats, submarines, aircraft, and mines created layered defenses that Japanese ships couldn't penetrate without prohibitive losses. The toys that Japanese naval commanders had dismissed in 1942 were now integral components of a maritime control system that had strangled Japanese sea communications. The irony wasn't lost on surviving Japanese naval officers. Commander Tameichi Hara, whose initial assessment had dismissed PT boats as pleasure boats, survived the war and wrote extensively about naval operations. In his 1961 memoir, he acknowledged, "We underestimated American PT boats catastrophically. We saw wooden boats and thought them primitive. We saw small size and thought them insignificant. We saw unconventional tactics and thought them improper. We were wrong on every count." The Americans understood that naval combat in restricted waters at night favored small, fast attackers over large, powerful ships. They built weapons optimized for that combat environment. We continued trying to fight the decisive battle we had trained for, and they destroyed our logistics with wooden boats crewed by kids barely out of school. It was humiliating to realize that some of our most significant naval losses came from vessels we had dismissed as toys. The PT boat legacy influenced post-war naval doctrine globally. The concept of small, fast attack craft carrying missiles instead of torpedoes became standard for coastal defense. The Soviet Navy, observing PT boat effectiveness, built hundreds of torpedo boats based on similar principles. Modern patrol craft carry guided missiles, but the tactical doctrine, high speed, surprise attack, rapid withdrawal, descends directly from World War II PT boat operations. Of the 531 points boats built during the war, only a handful survive. PT 617, PT 796, and a few others are preserved in museums. Most were destroyed after the war. The wooden construction meant they couldn't be preserved indefinitely, and the gasoline engines were fire hazards in peacetime. But the boat's combat record remains. Over 28,000 combat missions, 150-plus enemy vessels sunk or damaged, countless rescues, invaluable reconnaissance, and strategic impact that far exceeded what their size and construction suggested was possible. The Japanese Navy laughed at PT boats as toys. Then a squadron of those toys sank the cruiser Teruzuki in 90 seconds. Then those toys systematically destroyed Japanese coastal logistics, forced operational changes that consumed resources and time, and contributed to maritime control that isolated Japanese forces throughout the Pacific. The laughter stopped when Japanese sailors realized that wooden boats commanded by American kids had become some of the most dangerous weapons they faced, not because they were powerful, but because they were fast, smart, and employed by tacticians who understood that innovation beats tradition when the innovation is matched to the operational environment. The PT boats weren't toys. They were precisely calibrated weapons designed for a specific mission. They were exactly what was needed when it was needed, employed by people who understood their capabilities and limitations. And they proved that sometimes the best military response isn't bigger, heavier, more powerful. It's faster, smarter, and more adaptable to the environment where the fighting actually occurs.